Okay, I've been officially banned from my new Facebook account. For those of you who've been following the work that we're doing over there or been hearing about it, Facebook, so I have a main public page and then created a private account or just another account for people who are actually doing the Killer Bee inquiries so that we could have more interaction and engagement. And it worked because in this new account, people are, truly doing the work and asking questions, and I'm giving responses. And I'll get to the ban in a second, but one of the things that drove us there was that when you're a public figure, to reach a lot of people on your page, to reach the people that would benefit from what you're doing, you really do have to pay money. And I stopped doing that quite a while back, paying anything to Facebook. Anyway, so this new account was this way to really engage with a smaller audience. I've talked about this on YouTube, and that worked out so well. That smaller audience was very engaged with this work, but YouTube then, or Facebook, apparently thought that I was not Scott Killaby. And so they banned me, but I'm working on that. And I just bring that up to remind you that Facebook is not our final home. We're creating right now, and I'm going to announce it soon, what the forum is, what the program software is. We're going to announce this new site on the home where everything's in one place. Interaction with me, interaction with the facilitators listed on my site, videos, pre-recorded videos, live meetings, live videos where there's interaction, live Zoom videos, or where we're literally seeing each other, you're not just commenting on me on video. And then we're working towards pre-recorded sessions, so where I would just come on camera pre-recorded and I guide you specifically with the Killer Bee inquiries, and you just kind of follow along. So, we're working on all that, and we'll probably build a little bit of it first and then build more as we get there and we see more people coming. So that is just to say, hang in there. If you're one of those that watches these videos, you're going to see a change. Just a heads up, the work that we're doing is highly experiential. Like, if there's one word that describes it, it's experiential. There really isn't a lot of room for um so how do I say this? Well, let me just say it this way. It's really experiential. And that's what we're discovering and rediscovering constantly with people. That the transformation, the resonance, if you will, the deepening happens for those people who pick up the tools and go deeper with us. So I've wanted to move this conversation to a private forum because I want to interact with people actually doing the work. Now, so you're going to see a change here on YouTube. I'm not going to be doing examples of the Killer Bee inquiries here. I'm not going to be demonstrating it. I'm not going to be showing you how to do it. I've already explained all those reasons. But I am going to be on YouTube every now and then talking about topics that may be more accessible to a somewhat larger audience, because unless you're doing the Killer Bee inquiries, some of it is going to go right past you. Because people using those tools are discovering certain things, repression is lifting up, deeper embodiment, chronic pain, help with chronic pain. And you just don't get that normally from resting awareness. From just being. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? If we could just be. And then in being, everything gets. And I guess you could say that could happen. If all you did was awaken to the direct experience of presence, I suppose life eventually would give you every experience you would need to integrate that, to deepen into that realization, to embody it, to abide as it, or whatever. With the Killer Bee inquiries, is to say, don't wait on life. You're already believing it. So let's look at it. And so that's what accelerates. I think it accelerates the embodiment process a lot. So On YouTube, I'll be talking about things other than direct experience with the Killer Bee inquiries. There's still a lot to talk about. But since I'm banned, I can't even talk on Facebook today anyway. Someday I'll tell you the story that this is not the only thing I've been banned from. It's an interesting story. Okay, but not today. I wanted to discuss today something that I think most of you will resonate with, even if you're not experiencing it. Some of you won't. It's okay. Which is we talk about the recognition of awareness. I posted a excerpt from my book, Reflections of the One Life. I posted that on Facebook, and it was about choiceless awareness. Essentially, it was simply saying that when you recognize awareness, it's choiceless. It's not deciding between this and that, right and wrong, good and bad. Those appearances come and go to awareness, but the actual recognition itself is, as one teacher said, choiceless. Really, the post was just designed to help those who are doing this work not forget that the non-dual is the context in which we do the work. It's foundational for this work. There's so much talk that I do with inquiry, people sometimes forget that this work is based in non-dual awareness. My experience is that non-dual awareness. So everything that I do has something to do with that. I mean, I'm laughing because I don't know how you would ever split the baby. Or you would say that inquiry, if done well, how could it not be about the deeper recognition of that? So through the years after sitting with the realization of my own experience, I can see, and working with so many people, I feel that the initial recognition of awareness, that's different for everyone. Everyone experiences that a little bit differently, including the byproducts that come with it. Some people might say it was so blissful, so so much love and non-separation. Some people say no, it was more like a simple recognition of being aware. And my point being is no matter what happens, if we're open, the recognition, the quality of it begins to change. And that to me is the embodiment piece, the integration piece. The quality of my experience has changed through the years, and I've watched the quality of other people's recognition change. I've been actually blessed to have like a front row seat to that because, people are coming to the work, some of whom, many of whom, have already had that recognition of true nature and maybe have even been hanging out in that or as that for a number of years. But there can become this increasing sense for some people that, yeah, that's the end of the spiritual search. Like once you recognize that and that the ego is not what you are, then you see the seeking was all coming from the ego and the awareness there isn't. Seeking is a dead issue. The seeking of enlightenment. So people come to this work and, I would sit and talk to them first just to ask them about their experience. And they would say things like, yeah, I had a recognition in 2012. I'm walking here, I'm doing this, and it dawns on me, you know, things aren't what they appear. And since then, I've been essentially living from and as awareness. But then as the conversation would go deeper, more time together, start to learn that, for example, they would say things like, oh, you mean like that shame that I've always felt about myself with regard to my addiction or whatever? That has to be dealt with. And what's interesting is I never said to people it has to be dealt with because I don't think that that's the point. I mean, no, you don't have to deal with anything. But the thing is there's some suffering attached to whatever you don't resolve. And for example, people would come not having resolved shame, and you would be surprised, maybe, or maybe not so surprised, how that interferes with relationship. um, creating walls between you and others. There's all sorts of programs that we just simply carry right into the recognition of awareness. And it's very subtle. And if you're not careful, you'll actually tell yourself that either it doesn't matter or that it's not there. But it does matter to the quality of your life, actually, to the quality of your relationships. The quality of your recognition is everything when it comes to the quality of your life and your relationships because there is no separation. So if the quality of your recognition includes holding on to certain things, programs, feeling that in the body, holding on to that in the body, shame, still some element of deficiency story, unresolved trauma, emotional repression, that would absolutely affect your relationships and the quality of your life because all of that got developed in relationship. When mom and dad did or didn't do this, that imprint was left, those imprints. And to the extent that hasn't been seen through and hasn't been released from the body, that's still going to be affecting your life. There's no way to get around it. The body keeps the score. Relationship is a mirror, even in awakening, for sure, it's a mirror. So, whatever you don't embody will likely show up in relationship in some way. It could be your relationship to like your wife or your husband, but it might also be your relationship to like food, substances, potentially addictive substances and activities, your relationship to politics, your relationship to whatever is affected by the quality of your recognition. How do I know that? Just watching people come to me like there's a group of sort of a subset of people that would come and the recognition was dry. I can't say that that happened. That happened a little bit for me, but the heart opening happened at the same time as the non-dual thing. So it was anything but dry. And that was a body thing. So this is one way that I've learned this or unlearned it, is that because the heart opening happened at the same time that that non-dual experience happened, that infused the experience and the recognition. That heart opening was relevant to the quality of that recognition because it didn't end up being dry. It ended up feeling embodied somewhat from the beginning, not fully embodied, but somewhat in the heart area. And then that had an effect on relationship because so much before that, so much of the relationship issues, conflict, insecurity, deficiency was held in that area in the heart. So you can imagine if one awakens to awareness, but the heart or some area remains very stubbornly contracted, that would then have an impact on your relationships because it was literally developed, at least in large part, in relationship. Mom and dad. And look how we transfer that then over to all other relationships, and we're carrying all that there in the body. That we can thank science for. I mean, spirituality has been saying it in some traditions for hundreds of years, but science is coming back to confirm that how we hold things in the body imprints from the past, trauma, essentially. So the quality of the recognition has changed over the years. I think this is the thing that's hard for almost anybody to put into words. I've seen Jeffrey Martin try to contextualize it. He's the one that I don't remember the name of his group, but he's helping people awaken to awareness. So he contextualizes it, the post awakening unfolding a certain way. You know, that's fine. It's just trying to guide people, make sense that there's something that happens after the initial recognition. And that's great that he's providing some map for that. But people struggle, as far as I can tell, really eloquently, and I struggle with it too, explaining the experience of embodiment. But it does change the quality of the being, of the recognition. As I've embodied the recognition, meaning bringing awareness down in, pulling up old programs that are stuck to the body. What happens is there's an increasing sense of resonance, um, like a deeper, fuller, more reverberating recognition that feels more all encompassing. And this is where I first, as that started to deepen, is when I got interested in Ken Wilber's work, because at a certain point in embodiment, you can begin to hold all points of view within yourself. You're not identified with you may have a point of view, but you're not strongly identified with it, and you can hold that, like you can integrate a lot of different, very very different views without it being destabilizing. So, for example, I learned through the years that I could sit down earlier when in ego, before the recognition, I really couldn't sit down with a Christian fundamentalist, for example, because stuff hadn't been worked out in me in that regard. And when I would sit with them, I couldn't see past what I perceived as their belief systems, their limited belief systems. But that was actually a limitation in me coming from my own way of viewing the world. And as that fell away, I found myself no longer being at odds with certain people in certain groups. It's been a process, though. And so all I'm saying is what's almost inexpressible of how the deepening happens. But again, the quality of it, the recognition is increasingly deep, full, reverberating, all encompassing. It's like whatever areas that pop up where it still feels like there's an other or something that's been not integrated, the unfolding of embodiment almost invites that. It invites the inclusion of that, the integration of that. And if you don't, it can become so painful. That's the other thing. And that's been a surprise to me, how painful it can get when you don't integrate aspects of self. I mean, you know that I'm going to mention the obvious one here for me, which was, you hear it all the time, which is not integrating anger, including the expression of it. So before the inclusion of that, it's literal in a sense. It's like a part of me gets divided off from my experience. And here it felt like it was really the pain, the chronic pain. And in that, so much around anger, repression. And that felt like something, again, divided off from my experience. All my life, I had repressed that and pushed that away. So, of course, it was going to show up that way. But then in integrating that, doing the repression work, the trauma work around that, and watching the pain dissolve, there's an integration of something else that's happening. It's not just the relief of pain or the healing of a spine condition. That's just what it looks like on the surface. And that sounds good, you know? But there's another thing that happened in that. The healing of it itself was enough, you know, to be healed from a situation or a condition that where almost everybody else that I've ever read about is still suffering. And in many cases, it's getting worse. To have healed through that is, I am unspoken, inexpressible gratitude for that. But something else happened, which is, this is what I'm trying to put in words now. Beyond the healing, the quality of my recognition changed. It's not mine. That quality of the recognition could change as I get out of the way. And I really mean that, not as some spiritual pithy saying, but literally that there never was a self. There's just words, pictures, feelings, and sensations. And some of those words and pictures are just more unconscious. Like when you're awaking to awareness, you're awaking or transcending out of what you can see. The stuff that you thought it was you, in the awakening, you realize that's not you. But that doesn't mean you're done, because it's not like there's a self. I say it this way, it's not like there really is an entity. And then once you see through the entity, then you're done. There never was an entity. That's the thing. There was only, in my experience, the mind-body connection, the Velcro effect. So all my life being fooled into, because of the Velcro effect, being fooled and deceived into believing, seeing a separate self and separate others. And in inquiry, I discovered there is no entity. We did the unfindable inquiry for years with people all over the world, and no one ever found the entity. There is no self. It doesn't even have to be dogma, though. It's just a kind of a fact. But what's so good about that realization is that when you recognize there was never an entity, then you see what you're dealing with. You're dealing with words, pictures, feelings, and sensations, and just some of those words and pictures are buried in the sensations, hidden away. That's all. Amazingly simple in that way. So the process is just unearthing those things that are hidden away so that you can integrate that part of yourself that for whatever reason got cut off from you. It could have been abuse that happened. It could have been a certain relationship, something bad that happened, an imprint, a repression or repression, shame, addiction. All these things are important because these are the things that we're holding in our body. This is why I talk about these things in post awakening, even though they're kind of Western terms. It's okay because these Western terms are helpful to illuminate what it is that might be hiding in our experience so that we can have a deeper recognition. So it's nice that science is saying, well, here's this area, look at this trauma, here's our research on that. That leads to, in many cases, physical and mental health issues. And then science says, hey, look for this emotional repression, because as we study that, we're finding that that leads to pain and illness and, I would say contracted body. I'm waiting for science to really give us some good information on shame because I think there's more to discover there. But the deeper resonance in being is like, that's an example of like, I don't have to dismiss science. You can see and transcend science as an ultimate viewpoint, but then you don't have to dismiss it because it gets included. And that's the deepening part. It's like, oh, good information. Thanks. But if I was against that, that's just an example of integration. If I was against what science had to say, I just created a division there. I have my non-dual concepts and your science and your other. See, there's separation in that. So when the separation just continues to get seen through, it's like, oh, science is even welcomed in. It's all, it's all welcomed in. It's like everything has a place at the table. And in a sense, one way to describe the deepening process is you increasingly have no dog in any fight, and it isn't coming from peacemaking. And that is really hard to put into words because I prided myself in my ego peacemaker identity. I prided myself in being able to see all points of view, but a lot of that was coming from just wanting to make peace, just agreeing with people. This is a completely different thing where things get integrated, um, and there's no longer a dog in the fight. You're not fighting against the thing. It just gets integrated and included, but you're not making peace. Integrated is the thing. So all the things that we're against, people, paradigms, they're all grist for the mill to include, to notice where you're still dividing yourself off. So I do mean in those big ways, like with viewpoints and paradigms, those things could be divided off. We could be making enemies out of that and not integrating that, not seeing it all as the one life. But we also do it with the personal things in our life. Like, as I said, anger can get divided off. So the embodiment process for me has been a process of just being in awareness and then inquiring into those areas that seem to not want to be included in that for whatever reason. Because I get something out of it. Isn't that the reason? I get the dog in the fight when I identify with something and exclude something else. I not awareness, but I get to continue to exist in that separation. As you more deeply embody awakening, or let me speak for myself, you can see how much was run on fear, because all the things that we divided off from ourselves, whether it be like some paradigm or something, or anger or some trait or some trauma, anything that we press or divide off from ourselves, there's fear there because of the I. See, again, the I is involved. So that's what's so great about inquiry, because it illuminates where the I activity is. So when the I is identified with anything, it has to have an other, is my point. And so in some ways, that's our spiritual practice and embodiment, is to see where we see an other. And the other could even be like, for me, it was anger. It was an other. It's like, I don't have that. I don't have that. And then there's a division there. Or I, whatever the I wants to say, I have a non-dual realization. That's different than what everyone else see. And no matter what the I am a 12-stepper. These paradigms. And in identifying in that way, you literally have to have an other. So those others, as they show up, that's where the work is, because there's a threat there, if you notice. To be so inclusive as to not find an other is incredibly threatening to I. And so for me, that's the work. At least one way to explain the work and embodiment is to see where you continue to have divided something out from yourself. And then there's usually some fear of integrating that, because it threatens the I. But when you integrate everything and you don't have a dog in the fight, there's less and less I, or no I there at all, substantially. I mean, except for like a conventional self, right? Conventional, just the designations of thoughts that we say, I'm Scott, that's conventional. That's how you knew how to find my video, because I say it's Scott Gillivy on here. That's different than a real identification with something where there's a fear of the other, including, integrating, transcending whatever it is that you've made into another. It even goes to, like, this is an aspect of it too, is the way that you relate to the people in your life. So in the ego consciousness, when someone gets upset with you, it's very, very easy to take that as a threat, right? The other is threatening me. But that can even continue in the recognition of awareness. And I think some people think that how could that happen? How could it happen that if you're recognizing awareness as foundational to your experience, like you've had that recognition, how then could you be triggered by another? Because apparently you've seen through separation. But if you understand the seeing through separation as an unfolding, the embodiment process is unfolding, and get out of the thinking that there's going to be one experience one day that will shift you completely out of everything, because that's very rare, is my experience. Then there's an unfolding. And part of that unfolding is when you start to see, for example, when someone is upset, you no longer, excuse me, you no longer take it on. You no longer take it on yourself. Now that's tricky. Oh, is that tricky? Because we think of it this way. So let's say my husband or my ex-husband because I've been married through my whole time of this realization. So my husbands are my teachers. But for example, in the ego consciousness, when my ex-husband would get upset, I would easily take that personally, feel threatened by that, and not want to transcend whatever it was that I was identifying with, because that would have been scary. Even in the awakening, um, even in the awakening experience, there was still some leftover triggers happening for me. And so the question was, how could that happen? Well, because of the body. It's that simple. If you remember, there isn't and never was a self. There's only the experience of words, pictures, feelings, and sensations. An awakening to awareness might really show you that you're not that ultimately, but that doesn't mean the connections of the thoughts to the body have all been seen through. So, whatever mind body connection or Velcro effect is there around any particular thing, that can be like, that can be where you fall asleep. So, for example, with my husband triggering me, that was an example for me to see what hasn't been included in this recognition. Is there still something being believed? Still some sense of separation happening? So every single trigger then becomes a way to deepen into the unfolding until you get to a sense, an increasing sense that when someone is upset, you see that it's theirs, it's not yours. There's a shared sense of being already present, so you're recognizing that. And when they don't have sense of that in their own experience and get really identified, it becomes increasingly easier to see that's theirs, that's not mine. Whereas before you would like take it on, and then it triggers the identity within you, whatever that is. So are you experiencing that in relationship where it not only triggered less, when you're triggered, you integrate that trigger, but there's also more of a deeper sense of shared being. Like you're with someone and you, even though they're telling this or that story, you see beyond that. You see that ultimately they're not that, but they're just confused in that moment. This is where it gets really tricky though, because you can make all that intellectual and then it just becomes like a new religion. But to actually embody it is experiential. Like to let yourself get triggered and then embody that, whatever that is that that's there to show you, is very different than just saying stuff like this. And we can say things like this and it sounds really like poetic or seductive or spiritual. But if it's just talk, it's nothing more than a new kind of religion. So this is all experiential to me. But if I walked in a room and I said things like that weren't actually my experience, it would be fraudulent if I said um, that I've transcended all aspects of myself. That nothing is divided off, and I'm never ever triggered. That sounds like a good thing. That sounds good. But is that your actual experience? What I've been able to trust through the years is if I stick to my actual experience, I can't go wrong. So if I'm saying something in any moment in time that is not my experience, I'll try to withdraw that and speak again. And sticking to my experience, I can never go wrong. I think it's very easy to forget that and to start spouting this information without seeing how it really gets embodied and lived. That's the challenge for us, is to actually embody that and live that and not just speak it. So the other thing is that the non-dual, when I was seeking, the non-dual pointers were so important. And I mean, I was eating them, right? Like books by my toilet, books by my bed, by my TV, videos. And then in my head, non-dual pointers just streaming through. Be here now. Just notice the moment. notice thought, let it be, all that stuff. You are the space in which it's happening, whatever. All that was really, really important until the recognition of awareness. And then all of that is just like clutter. Because it's like, at a certain point, it's like saying, it's like someone saying to you over and over again, this is a cup. See, this is a cup. And they start describing it and pointing it to it. And like, I know because I'm holding it, I'm drinking. I don't need you to point to it anymore. It's like that. So pointing to awareness is like pointing to a fish, explain water to them at a certain point. So the pointers start falling away for people. And then for me, I should say, the non dual just becomes the foundation of experience. And that was something that I wasn't really prepared for, so to speak. I just, in the sense that no one told me that it's almost like the non dual awareness just goes right to the background. And it's just the framework in which you live or the context within which you live. Whereas before you were coming from the sense that you're the thoughts, you're the person, you're the body. That's seen through, and now you know yourself ultimately is that non dual awareness. And I believe that once that was recognized, that would be at the forefront of my experience. Like, and that, how do I say this? I guess I was surprised to see that how that just becomes the foundation of experience. But what was interesting about that, then what happens is a transformation. So with awareness as the foundation, what I started to notice is the forms are being transformed. The forms are being changed. Even the form of the body, mind, Scott. So through the work, the way that Scott shows up, the expression of Scott changes. As traumas are released, anger is integrated, other integrations happen, repression literally showing up differently on the level of form, the level of the expression of you. And that's quite a nice thing to realize that we spent all that time thinking that from the ego consciousness we could transform the ego when all we did was sort of spin ourselves in circles. And then we recognize the non-dual, where it seems like this movement of individuality no longer seems important because it was ego. But then we recognize it is important. But it's just different now. We're not identified with it. All of it's still here for us, the individual expression. And that's also what I'm interested in talking about. Is not just that we are all sort of transcendent awareness. There's that, and then we also show up individually as an expression. And the transformation of that individual expression, individual apparent, whatever, is fascinating to me because now I'm starting to see the transformations that I wanted so much to happen in the ego consciousness, but it couldn't happen because of how the ego consciousness works. Now the transformation happens within awareness, and I get to see it. And what is the transformation? It's just that. It's the embodiment of that recognition. So whatever hasn't been seen, it gets integrated and seen. And for some reason, where I think I know why, there was a switch in me where it's like, I no longer even made a big deal out of the transcendent, the awareness. You've actually seen that in the way that I share my message because I don't spend a lot of time just pointing to awareness. I can, and I will. But I feel like that's being done out there a lot, really well, actually. The teachings are just razor sharp on pointing to awareness. I feel like I want to talk about that, but also want to talk about this thing that happens after and that transformation that happens where the forms actually change. The way you show up in the world changes. Maybe more authentically, less defended, more open. And that's a transformation. that's the kind of transformation that I was looking for in ego consciousness, but I couldn't have that because, again, the ego consciousness is just essentially based on a deficiency story that wants to confirm itself. And that's it, for the most part. It's like with the recognition of awareness, everything that we try to avoid, that we try to bypass, that we didn't want to deal with, all the things that were motivating us to escape from them, those things that we've been escaping from, thinking that if I can just get away from that, all those things come back to be included, is what I found. And that could be a real shocker to recognize that that trauma that happened when you were 7 years old that you thought was not a big deal actually starts to become a big deal because of how your body holds it. And then to come to find out that this includes that also, includes the integration of that. When all of your life you spent keeping that under the rug, excuse me, I had a shiver, pushing that under the rug, and maybe even seeking enlightenment to escape from it, come to find out the awakening brings you right back to it, and that you can't escape it. Poetic, isn't it? Some comments here. YouTube doesn't allow me to keep comments up very long, they fade. Yes, oh, good one, Heather. Says she's a peacemaker coming to rise through KI, that the peacemaking is driven by not peace but fear. Yes. Wow. Right. I won't get started on that topic, but how it's so easy when you have a peacemaker ego to keep a lot of that intact, unbeknownst to you as you recognize awareness, because its whole, on the surface, the peacemaker ego looks as if its desire is peace. So it seems to align with the peace that one recognizes in this recognition. But it's so deceptive because it is coming from fear and deficiency. And that gets seen in the recognition. And that's why I think even your peacemaker ego has to go, because that's a part of you that you've divided off from source. You've said, this is me. I am the nice spiritual peacemaker one, but that's not you. See, but that served you well. It served us well in life, in ego consciousness, because we got rewarded, stayed safe, all that stuff, but then even that has to go. I think this is one of the areas that's really difficult for people to see, is how the ego identity of peacemaker gets enmeshed in the realization and entangled into it, where you can't even discern at a certain point the difference between the peace that passes all understanding, which comes from the realization, and the peace that the little ego needs to have in order not to feel fear or deficiency. You can see how they can just completely entangle with each other, and it gets really confusing. And tons of bypassing can follow from there because you can't even see what's going on. Right. So there you go. That's good. I'm sorry, I'm having trouble seeing with my eyes. Surely, though, if there is no other, then everything you see is their problem, is really all my own problem. Ooh. Mm-hmm. There you go. It's easier to make the other, isn't it? Just their problem. That's beautiful. Hmm. It takes everything. The embodiment process it's like what Adia said in the book, The End of Your World. I just feel like that was one of the more honest books out there about that, is it's a process of falling away, a demolition project, and it's not going to be done with you until it's done. And he even talked about it as surrendering to the inevitable, the end of everything that you have created separation around. All right, guys, I may be back on in a little bit. Thanks for being with me.